6. The Bismarck. The Bismarck was a German battleship that saw combat during World War II. It's one of the most famous and powerful warships of all time. The Bismarck is famously known for its involvement in Operation Rheinebung. The mission, which took place in May 1941, sought to disrupt Allied shipping lines in the Atlantic Ocean. During this operation, the Bismarck sank the British battlecruiser HMS Hood, but in the process, it was also heavily damaged and was in need of repairs. After sinking the HMS Hood, the Bismarck rose to the top of the priority target list for the British Royal Navy, since they saw it as a massive threat to their remaining ships. This was especially true after such a ship as renowned as the HMS Hood was taken down so easily. As a result, the British forces threw the entirety of their strength behind efforts to bring the Bismarck down, as it was relentlessly pursued by both battleships and aircraft. The Bismarck was eventually disabled by British torpedoes. Unable to escape, it was decisively scuttled by its own crew on May 27, 1941. The Bismarck wallowed in its watery grave for almost 50 years, until June 8, 1989, when Dr. Robert Ballard and his team located the wreckage. It was approximately 600 miles west of the French city of Brest. The ship's final resting place was found 15,700 feet under the sea's surface. Despite the decades of time that have passed and the massive attack against it, the Bismarck is surprisingly still in amazing condition. The vessel was in an upright position on the seabed, firmly embedded inside layers of mud and silt. This is pretty impressive considering the extensive damage the warship sustained from British shellfire and torpedo attacks, not to mention the force the ship hit the seabed. The impact could be comparable to a high-speed train slamming into a mountain at full force. With this in mind, it's surprising that the Bismarck's remains have held up so well. Except for a section of the stern that broke off, the main hull remains mostly intact, as well as a majority of the secondary battery turrets and anti-aircraft guns. The same can be said for the forward conning tower and bridge, despite suffering substantial damage in its final battle. Even remnants of intricate woodwork and paint are still visible on the wreck's surface, things that are normally the first to go over time. Despite never reaching its full potential on the surface of the water, the Bismarck will continue to hold the fascination of historians for many years to come. 5. HMS Victory. The HMS Victory was designed by Sir Thomas Slade and built at Chatham Dockyard in 1759. This vessel was one of the largest ever built for its time, with over 2,000 oak trees used in the construction of the ship's hull alone, which would have required nearly 60 acres of forest to be cut down. The final cost of the project was £63,176, which would be well over £50 million today, or approximately $63.7 million. The ship had 104 guns, 27 miles of rigging, and a massive 4 acres of sail. Considering her large size, she could have easily sailed faster than any of the smaller ships around her, thanks to her revolutionary hull design. Despite the sheer size, cost, and majesty of the ship, the decision to call it HMS Victory wasn't a popular one. The name had been plagued with disaster, and just 15 years before, the previous HMS Victory sank in the English Channel and killed everyone unlucky enough to still be on board. The new HMS Victory was officially launched on May 7, 1765, but she saw her first bit of action as a commission ship almost 13 years later in March 1778, when she took part in the War of American Independence, which happened between 1775 to 83. After getting a refit, HMS Victory was once again back in action 10 years later in 1793 as the flagship for Vice Admiral Lord Hood. The same year, the ship joined an alliance of British and Spanish ships that were trying to capture Toulon, but in the end they gave in to French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte's crew and relinquished the French port. The next year, in 1794, Victory played a role in another showdown, this time in France's Calvi. The HMS Victory was part of the British fleet that officially kicked the French out of Corsica. After some additional upgrades in the winter of 1794, Victory went back to the Mediterranean as a flagship under Sir John Jervis, who led it into the Battle of Cape St. Vincent on February 14, 1797. The ship was a complete juggernaut at the start of the battle, disabling and damaging countless enemy ships. It took a heavy beating though, and by the end of 1797, Victory was finally sent back home as a floating hospital for injured troops. The most famous captain of the HMS Victory was a legendary commander named Horatio Nelson, who used the vessel in an assault against a French fleet. The Victory was used by Nelson from 1803 until 1805 in the pivotal Battle of Trafalgar. Although Nelson didn't survive the battle despite winning, the HMS Victory was heavily damaged. She returned home with Nelson's body and underwent repairs. But thanks to sentimentality as Nelson's last warship and her legendary status after serving over 40 years at sea, HMS Victory was never deployed again and was instead docked in Portsmouth Harbor. It was later converted into a tourist attraction. HMS Victory can still be found in Portsmouth to this day, although she's been moved to a dry dock to make sure she can last for generations to come. 4. The Yamato. One of the most feared battleships in the Pacific Theater was known as the Yamato. The Yamato and its sister ship the Musashi were two of the heaviest and most heavily armored battleships ever built by Japan. They were constructed as part of rearmament efforts in the 1930s. When fully loaded, the Yamato had a length of 863 feet and a displacement around 72,800 tons. When it came to firepower, the Yamato had quite the arsenal. It was equipped with 9 18.1-inch main guns that were arranged in 3 triple turrets. At that point in time, they were the largest naval guns ever mounted on a battleship. These guns were capable of firing projectiles over vast distances and causing significant damage. The Yamato was deployed extensively in World War II. It served during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, where it was part of the Japanese fleet's attempt to disrupt Allied landings in the Philippines. But things didn't go as planned for Japan, and the Yamato was unable to achieve its goals. This didn't stop the Yamato from being any less of a threat though, and on April 7, 1945, it was part of Operation Tengo, a desperate last-ditch attempt by Japanese troops to defend Okinawa. The ship was attacked by overwhelming numbers of American aircraft, and it was eventually hit by multiple bombs and torpedoes. The resulting explosions led to the ship sinking. Many of its crew died in the attack. The wreck of the Yamato was later discovered in 1985 by American oceanographer Robert Ballard, the same man who found the wreck of the Bismarck a few years later. It currently rests on the seafloor off the coast of Japan. What would you do if you found a shipwreck? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. 3. The Shanhost. The Shanhost was a German Navy battleship, but it's typically referred to as a battle cruiser because of its relatively higher speed and lighter armor compared to traditional battleships. The Shanhost was launched in 1936. It was part of a class made up of 2 ships, with the other being the Gneisenau. The Shanhost had a displacement weight of 38,000 tons and was armed with 9 11-inch main guns, lighter anti-aircraft guns, and secondary armaments. In April 1940, at the start of World War II, the Shanhost and its sister ship Gneisenau participated in the invasion of Norway, or Operation Weserübung. During this mission, the ships targeted Norwegian coastal defenses and helped secure critical ports for German forces. After the successful occupation of Norway, the Shanhost and Gneisenau started their commerce raiding missions in the North Atlantic. Their goal was to disrupt Allied supply lines by attacking convoys and merchant ships. Their speed allowed them to evade capture and inflict heavy damage on shipping routes, meaning that they were menaces on the waves. The Shanhost's involvement in Arctic convoy operations meant it was in direct conflict with Allied naval forces. In December 1943, during the Battle of the Barents Sea, the Shanhost tried to intercept a convoy heading for the Soviet Union, but it was met by British naval forces, mainly the battleship HMS Duke of York. After a fierce battle, the Shanhost was eventually sunk on December 26, 1943. 2. USS Enterprise, CV-6. The USS Enterprise was commissioned in 1938 and spent much of her deployment in the Pacific Ocean. This led to the vessel being the very first warship to sink a Japanese warship, the submarine I-70, only 3 days after the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. In April 1942, the Enterprise supported the Doolittle raid on Japan and in June of that same year, she was an integral part of the Battle of Midway, where with the help of the aircraft stationed on board, she was able to take out 3 Japanese carriers and a cruiser. During the Guadalcanal campaign, she participated in the battles of the Eastern Solomons and the Santa Cruz Islands. Despite being damaged in both, she launched aircraft to help other ships, proving that she could still keep fighting. The USS Enterprise wasn't done yet though, since her list of feats and engagements during World War II's Pacific Theater kept growing. From the latter part of 1943 through the start of 1944, the Enterprise played a role in the invasions of the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, as well as conducting air assaults against Japanese targets in the Pacific. During the summer of 1944, the ship was involved in the Marianas Operation and the Battle of the Philippine Sea. After this, it participated in the historic Battle of Lake Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, in October. Moving into February 1945, the Enterprise contributed during the Iwo Jima invasion, subsequently engaging in raids on the Japanese mainland and participating in the Okinawa campaign in April. Because of the damage taken on by 2 kamikaze attacks in April and May, she returned to the United States. Sadly, though, USS Enterprise wouldn't do much else in her post-war years, and despite efforts to turn her into a museum, she was finally sold for scrapping in July 1958. 1. HMS Hood. The HMS Hood is probably one of the most famous ships from the entire 20th century. Built as a flagship between the 2 world wars, her fate was intertwined with another behemoth of the seas. At the time she was laid down, HMS Hood was the largest battle cruiser ever built, making it the world's largest warship, and it stayed the largest until the Queen Elizabeth class of aircraft carriers came around in 2017. The ship stood as a symbol of Britain's strength and global influence and soon became famous around the world. The HMS Hood was a huge source of pride for the Royal Navy, and because of this, it was run by the very best men and commanders the fleet had to offer. It participated in fleet-wide exercises around the globe, showing up the other ships with its gunmanship, expertise, and innate ability to command the waves. The HMS Hood was the natural choice to lead the Special Service Squadron on the Empire Cruise, which visited ports across Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and even the United States. As the Second World War broke out in 1939, Hood had already served about 20 years in commission. Thanks to its massive size and because it had been incredibly busy touring around the world, the Hood wasn't able to get any upgrades or refits for the new conflict. But newer battleships were being commissioned left and right that were equipped with armor reflecting 2 decades of advancements that easily put the defenses of HMS Hood to shame. Even still, HMS Hood held her own. In the Battle of Mers el Kabir in July 1940, Hood was tasked with taking out the French battleships, which had been taken over by enemy forces when the country was initially invaded. The HMS Hood handled the task easily, inflicting heavy damage on the French fleet. When the Allies learned that the German ship the Bismarck had been launched and was attacking merchant vessels in the Atlantic, it was no surprise that they called upon the Hood to end its reign of terror. The ship's speed meant it was able to quickly catch up to the newly built German battleship, and soon it was facing off the Bismarck and its companion ship Prinz Eugen. Hood wasn't alone though, since one of the newer warships in the Royal Navy fleet, the Prince of Wales, accompanied it to help out. The battle took place in the Denmark Strait, which is situated between Iceland and Greenland. The engagement was quick and brutal. A single German shell managed to penetrate a weak spot in the HMS Hood's armor, setting off a catastrophic explosion that wrecked the ship and took the lives of about 1,415 men on board. Technical difficulties forced the Prince of Wales to disengage from the fight, although after what just happened to HMS Hood, this was probably a smart move. Stunned by the sheer loss of what had been the flagship of their fleet, the Royal Navy started a relentless manhunt to find and take down the Bismarck, sinking it only 3 days later. But many people still wonder how this battle would have turned out if the HMS Hood had had the same upgrades as the newer warships in the fleet. Thanks for watching. Which one of these warships do you think was the most powerful? Which would win if they were all pit against each other? Let us know what you think in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. See you next time, bye!